FS Pawn Shop. My name is Eric Romoff. You can find me on those Twitter streets at FantasyNav, and riding shotgun with me, as always, is my dude, Mike Holland. Mike, how's it going this afternoon as we get an early start in the pawn shop?
Well, it's another Saturday, another loss for Texas. So, yeah, about the same feeling, but I'm ready for a profitable Saturday, Sunday. So, in the DFS world.
Yeah, Mike is rolling hot in a number of ways, not named his fandom for the UT Longhorns. Another rough Saturday for your boys, but I know you got a little NASCAR rolling, a little bit of hoops coming up, and obviously we're going to chip away at this Week 8 slate. For those of you that are returning to the pawn shop, you know how we get down here every single week. We spend a little bit of time taking a look at these showcase games. These are the marquee games where we're going to spend the majority of our time. We go peruse through the sales rack, and because we are suckers for a good time, we at least peek into the bargain bin, and what it leaves you with is walking away with all of the stacks and core plays that you need to get the most bang for your buck in Week 8. Mike, Week 8 is back to a beefy 12 gamer. Anything kind of strategy-wise that you're looking at in terms of how you want to attack this slate?
For me, the slate's kind of similar to last week, even though we got a few more games. I think all the ownership's going to be kind of concentrated into 3 or 4 games here, and then we're going to have to go dumpster diving and find. Looking forward to it. I always like a bigger player pool. Find some value in there. Obviously another question mark this week, as it is every week, is going to be what to do at tight end. I think quarterback, it's a little more cut and dry for me this week, and then just kind of mix and matching some of these running back and receiver plays that we'll talk about here, and hopefully we can ship another GPP, as I was able to take down one of the 1K to first on draft to CJ Uzoma to Jamar Chase, run back with Brown and whoever else was in that lineup. I think it was Freeman. So, an interesting lineup, but hey, it got there. So, looking forward to seeing.
We'll continue to call that the Tinker Time special. First and foremost, congrats! It's a huge win, and I think the thing that people who are listening can take away from it is many people, myself included, have sort of a love-hate relationship with Tinker Time. But the way that our guy Mike went about it is exactly how you do it. You don't tinker with the existing lineups that you've put in. You instead add a new lineup and get weird with it. And that's exactly how our guy ultimately pulled down a 4-figure payday.
Yep, that's exactly how it happened. So let's see if we can't do it again, right?
Run it back. So with that, we will dive right into the showcase. Like I mentioned at the top, these are the marquee games on the slate. This week is a little bit of an interesting texture. Not a ton of high game totals. Everything is kind of clustered right in terms of kind of the mid to high 40s on the over-unders. But the first game that we'll talk about is actually the only game that is over a 50-point total, and that is Tennessee and Indianapolis. We're looking at a 1:00 game. It opened at 47.5 and has surged like Remy Ma all the way up to 51. So the Titans actually opened as a 1-point fave, but that flipped over to Indy, who's now laying 2.5, and that leaves the Titans with a 24.25 implied total and Indy at 26.75. So, Mike, the Titans are coming off of back-to-back wins against the class of the AFC, at least who we thought was the class of the AFC. Sorry, Chiefs fans. And they're looking like the potential Super Bowl contenders that some people had them slated as coming out of the preseason. And the Colts have looked better, at least than many people, myself included, thought they would. Over the past 4 weeks, they've been averaging nearly 30 points a game. So with that, is this kind of the game that you're going to be looking at as maybe the centerpiece of your builds this week?
I'm going to have some parts of this game, but I think that this is anytime people start building their DFS lineups, they look at what is the number one total on the board. So I think you're going to have a lot of exposure in this game. So for me, I'm going to try to dial it down a little bit But we do have some interesting news. He just has like rest days in his claws, or what the deal is here. He's got another hammy issue. So obviously, who do we fire up in that? It's going to be A.J. Brown, 6,900. And then on the other side, I do like Taylor at 7,200 at that running back position. I think both of those guys are primed to have big games. But, as per usual, whenever you have the top game on the board, you do want to do things differently. And or even how I got to my last lineup last week was by playing one person off of this lineup and hoping it goes. There's some other guys down here at the bottom that are in play, and if one or two of them can hit and you can be different, then it's going to obviously set you apart from the rest of the field. So that's kind of where I'm looking at right now.
Yeah, you had me smiling talking about Julio's clause. He's got that Kyrie clause where he's only playing home games this year apparently because he is out again. It does open up a lot of stuff in terms of the other pieces in that Tennessee offense. Where I actually want to spend a little bit more time is on the Indianapolis side of the ball, and specifically looking at Jonathan Taylor, right? He's been crushing it this year. He now gets Braden Smith back on the line, so that line is really back at kind of its full health that we were anticipating when they came in, and squaring off in the game and on a slate against the very perennially chalky Derrick Henry. What are your thoughts on going to JT as your pay up option and maybe trying to leverage off of Henry?
Yeah, I'm not going to have much of Henry this week. So I think, obviously Taylor's going to be, so yeah, I'll have my share of him. For the most part, I think you can kind of get away from Henry just getting to that 9,000 price tag. The Colts are decent up front. And I think also that the availability of A.J. Brown here to kind of go off instead of Henry is always potentially the case here. So a Tannehill A.J. Brown stack is going to be a little bit I think a little bit different. I know that Tannehill up to 6,600 now, and people are going to see that. I'll play a little bit of him, but I think just in general he's not a very popular quarterback that people want to play, especially with Derrick Henry just staring you in the face there when you look at the entire game slate here. So, yeah, I think for me, I'm going to kind of mix it up. I may have a few shares of Wentz here. But obviously, I think one of my number one targets here is going to be Michael Pittman. I just think that he's in a really good spot here, and I think it's someone that could go for 20-plus fantasy points.
Yeah, that's the other name that I have highlighted on this matchup in particular, right? Pittman just feels like he's too cheap sitting down at $5,300 given his role in this offense. But that role in the offense is a little bit in question because we are at least reportedly going to see T.Y. Hilton back on the field. His one game against Houston where he loves to go off was also simultaneously Pittman's worst performance of the year. So you think we see Hilton and eat away at his opportunity and maybe a good amount of ownership given that price tag?
I hope it does. I hope T.Y. kind of eats into the ownership of Pittman here because I do want to have some pretty decent exposure to Pittman. As far as T.Y. and him going here, I know he had 4 catches, 80 yards, so good for 12 fantasy points. If he gets that same kind of line, puts it in the end zone at 5K, you're going to be pretty happy about that. And he's obviously got upside. So, yeah, I think obviously if you're giving a look at, especially in this game environment, I think to be different, playing a Wentz with, someone like a Pascal, if the game flow kind of goes right and you get some Hines targets here, he's someone that you'd also play with. So like I said, I'm always just trying to find different and unique ways to kind of attack, the number one game on the board that as far as the total is concerned.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Any other plays or things that kind of pop off the page for you with this game?
No, I mean, I think we know where we want to go for the most part, and I think it's whether or not you want to play some of these leverage plays. It's really going to make the difference in which ones, what can pay off here, or is it simply just going to be chalk? Because I think if you're facing lineups like, I think a lot of builds will, especially cash builds, I think you pretty much have to play nowadays in cash. I think they're just going to start with him, AJ Brown. So, in tournaments, I think you just have to find ways to just be creative and be different.
Makes sense. So with that, we will move on to our second game in the showcase, and that is the New England Patriots heading to La La Land for a 4:05 game against the Chargers. This is another one that crept up from open. It opened at 47.5, added a full 2 points, is now sitting at 49.5. And actually, the Chargers have been the ones that have been hurt by that movement. They opened as a 6-point favorite, but they've now settled into a 4.5-point favorite at home. So that gives them an even 27-point implied total, with the Patriots carrying 22.5. So, Mike, the Chargers are one of the many teams coming off of a bye week and a much-needed bye after they got boat raced by the Ravens. And a week ago, Mac Jones looked like he might be the next coming of Tom Brady against a lowly matchup against the Jets. So, a lot of movement in this game. It tends to tell me that it has the eye of the public on it. What do you make of this matchup?
Man, I don't know. I'm not too high on this matchup, which means that ultimately this will be the last lineup I make, and it'll probably hit the be my top score. But yeah, I'm looking at this one as more of a kind of a one-off scenario or mini stack type game. I don't mind Justin Herbert at 7,300, especially now that Williams' price has kind of come back down a little bit, down to 7,700. It's a little bit easier to click that button. A monster game coming from him, so I'm gonna keep attacking him. I like to use him as a one-off scenario though, and then just kind of looking at the other side. I know Mac Jones looked good against the Jets, but everyone looks good against the Jets. So I don't kind of take that with a grain of salt for me. He's 5,200. I don't think this is the greatest matchup, but it is a good environment. I'm probably just not going to go there. But I think Damian Harris is someone that you can definitely look at here as someone here, and I think he's going to be a little bit popular. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm coming at it from a similar line, and actually specifically to your Damian Harris mention, it might be one of my favorite plays on the slate. We so rarely see a guy that has that crystal clear early down role carved out for himself. And this Chargers defense, they realize what division they set in. They centered themselves around that too high shell that Kansas City has a lot of trouble around, but ultimately it kind of dares their opponents to run the ball. So should be some pretty good lanes there for Harris. And I think that the game plan will be one where ultimately New England tries to control the clock and keep the ball out of Justin Herbert's hands. To your point about not minding Herbert, I actually think that he might be a pretty interesting leverage play, right? It might be kind of oversimplified analysis, but for me, anytime that there is a running back in a particular game that is projected to carry super high ownership, usually that means that their quarterback is going to be under-owned. So I kind of like to go towards those guys and stack them up and get leverage against the field that way. So I'll probably be a good bit overweight on Herbert. And this is doing so knowing that prior to their last time out against Baltimore, when Herbert saw New England as a rookie, it was absolutely his worst game of his career. So there's certainly some risk in there, but I do like the idea of kind of spinning off of that Eckler ownership and getting onto Herbert.
Yeah, Eckler being the fourth highest price tag here, I could see it, and yeah, I see why he could be popular. Obviously, really the third highest price tag because McCaffrey's on IR, so a little bit of a steep price to pay. I feel like I don't know. I just feel like Belichick would probably want to try to take him away, which is why I like Herbert and Williams, because I think obviously in the passing game and the running game, you can shut him down. You can, really start to attack Herbert here. So I don't know. I'm not going to have too much of him. There's some other plays beneath him that I'm going to take stabs at to try to get some leverage on that. And as we kind of talk about these games, I'll mention these guys in relation to plays that I think that you can come off of for Herbert. So, I think for the most part, I'll have a few shares of this game, more of a mini stack environment. more of a one-off environment for me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It just kind of categorically, are you firmly going to die on the Keenan Allen hill, or are you just kind of always going to play whichever of the two receivers is least expensive?
No, I think right now I'm as looking at the pricing and just knowing that Allen's going to have a 20-plus game coming soon. I think I'm playing it 2-1. So, for every 2 Allens, I'll have 1 Williams. We get that blow-up game.
Makes a lot of sense. So a couple of pieces here and there, maybe a mini stack, but not the centerpiece of your build. So we will move on to Buffalo. 1:00 game. They are hosting the Dolphins. This one is a 49-point game total, down by half a point. Buffalo is a huge favorite. They're actually the biggest favorite here in the early slate. They're laying 14 points at home. So that leaves them with a 31.5-point implied total, with Miami at 17.5. So Buffalo, another team coming off of a bye week after a pretty tough luck loss on Monday night against the Titans. They do have a little bit of injury concern they have to navigate by way of missing Dawson Knox. And on the Miami side, Tua's looked pretty solid for consecutive weeks. If you remove a couple of boneheaded interceptions, he's looked borderline great over the last 2 weeks. But those were also against pretty subpar opponents defensively. So what line you taking on this game? Any pieces that you're looking at? Is this where you're maybe starting some stacks?
Well, you look at it, man, I would like to play some of the Buffalo side, but good Lord, the fact that I want to attack is both 8,100, Allen and Diggs. So, I mean, I don't know too many people that are going to want to fire that up, which kind of makes me like it a little bit. But, Miami's tough on the outside. So, I may have a few shares of that stack. I am naked. I don't know if you want to do that this week, though. But yeah, this game is tough for me because you look at it outside of those 2 guys, everyone else is 5,600 or less. So there's a lot of other pieces in this game that are really enticing, especially the Devontae Parker news. If he's playing this week, I liked him last week at 5K, so now he's down to 4,900. I don't mind it, especially if they get down early. And I will 2 action at 5,500, pairing him with the 4,900 Devontae Parker. It's time to get a little weird in some of these larger field tournaments.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a good piece of news to keep an eye on is the availability of Devontae Parker. He is trending in the right direction, seemingly, but obviously we'll get a better picture heading into game time, and being an early window, we'll have a good line of sight as to his availability before kickoff. For me, I love the point that you mentioned in terms of the price tag for the Allen Diggs stack. I do think that's going to keep ownership on that pairing relatively low, right? There's not a ton of awesome value across this slate, so it's going to be hard for people to drop 16 grand, better than 16 grand on their primary stack. So I do think you can leverage against the field in that way. The other plays, and actually potentially looking at a double stack, I really want to attack this Miami defense over the middle, right? They've got strong outside corners. The name to keep in mind there would have been Dawson Knox. Obviously, he's unavailable due to injury in this week. So of the sort of over the middle options, any interest in Cole Beasley? Obviously, the coaching staff came out and gave a pretty strong endorsement to Sweeney, the backup tight end, who will now be starting this week. Either of those pieces of any interest to you?
I'm super interested in Beasley. I'm also fighting for that price tag, so you don't mind that at all. And he's actually one of my favorite one-off targets. If I'm stacking other games and trying to get a piece of it, probably going to be pretty popular in most of my builds in that regard. As far as anything else in this matchup, Emmanuel Sanders, 5,400. I don't know. It's just really tough to pay that extra 500, from Beasley to Sanders.
Yeah.
And then, Gesicki's always in play. He's just talk about it on the show that we either want to spend up at the top dog at Kelsey, who's not on this slate, or just kind of punt this position. So he's in a kind of an interesting spot here. I'm going to have a couple just because I know how he's very involved in this offense and a great red zone target. So, other than Beasley and Gesicki, I don't have much interest in the running game on either side here. I'm just going to kind of let those play out how they do. If they burn me, they burn me. But yeah, that's just kind of where I'm attacking.
Yeah, I'm gonna have some Gesicki too, and we'll talk about it as we get a little bit further into the slate. But just generally, I mean, he is one of those wide receivers playing tight end. Obviously, the availability of Devontae Parker is going to be critical in terms of his workload. So might walk that back a bit more if Parker is in fact going to be playing, but if not, definitely like him to stay plenty busy as one of the few receiving options for Miami. Anything else with this matchup in particular, Mike?
No, I think we can kind of move on, get into some of the weirder games.
Let's get weird. And the first weirder game out there is the Philadelphia Eagles facing off against the Detroit Lions. We are still in the 1 o'clock window. This one is looking at an even or a total of 48.5 points. Philly is a 3.5 point favorite, so that gives them an implied total of 26, with Detroit sitting at 22.5. We talked a lot about the Detroit Lions in their matchup against the Rams last week, and how that insane line was a trap, and it looks like the market kind of adjusted to that. This is actually the closest line that they've had so far on the season against the Eagles. And on the Philly side, at least for me, this kind of feels like the point where we can get like a full game of good production out of Jalen Hurts instead of just half of the fourth quarter. Anything jump off the page for you with this one, Mike?
Man, I think this is the most interesting game of the slate. This is the most interesting game of the slate, honestly. I feel like this game could easily go way under the total, or this just could be a shootout, and it's like, why didn't I get more pieces of this game? So I have no idea what's going to happen here. Jalen Hurts, 7,200. I mean, I think obviously playing Detroit here, I'm going to have some pieces of this. Stack with which is Devontae Smith. So I don't know how crazy I'm going to go with it, but I mean, the more I talk about this game, the more I like it, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Swift's in play, 7,100. That price tag is but I'm gonna get him in some of these run backs here with that Hurts and Smith stack. You put that stack together, you've spent around 20 grand. A lot of people are going to attack this game in more of a one-off scenario, which makes me want to play it in a stackable type game here. Hawkinson, 5,400. He's in that same range here that we just talked about. It's like, do you want to spend this much on a tight end this week? I don't mind it, but we'll kind of have to see as we get closer to lock here. And I think obviously with the news with Sanders here and obviously Gainwell being 5K, I mean, he's looked pretty good in parts, different parts of those lineups here.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to be the Huckleberry that's going to have way too much of this game. Jalen Hurts is maybe the best cash play on the board this week. Obviously, we talk about things from a GPP context here at the Pawn Shop. But ultimately, I think a strong cash play can be very much so viable in the tournament world if you stack and run back appropriately. The stacking partners are super clear in Philadelphia, right? We talk about Devontae Smith every single week. We now have a game of Dallas Goddard all by himself as the only tight end option there, and he did exactly what we want him to do. And ultimately, looking at this defense that Detroit's going to trot out, that over the middle, kind of intermediate range is going to be wide open for Dallas Goddard to do what he needs to. And it's right into kind of the preferences of where Jalen Hurts likes to distribute the ball. So I'm actually going to probably be most exposed to Dallas Goddard of the entire tight end pool. And this was actually what I was alluding to a minute ago. So we've talked every week about how it's this kind of boom bust approach, right? You pay all the way up or you punt at the position. And I've actually been finding myself sort of settling into this middle ground with some really under-owned guys. Do you think that that's happenstance, or do you think that's maybe a strategy that we should kind of explore a bit more?
Yeah, I don't mind it at all. As we get going in the season, you're finding less and less, I feel like, tight ends that you want to stomach down here at the very bottom. So, one thing about Jared Goff is he's going to check it down. He's going to use his tight end. So, yeah, Swift and Hawkinson definitely in play for me. I wish there was a receiver pair with Goff because I would like to play him a little bit this week. Maybe a couple of lineups here or there. It's just a little. I think that's really something that you want to do unless your quarterback's a runner. Pairing him with any of these receivers, that just makes for a very difficult Sunday to kind of stomach through. So, I'm going to try to find a way to kind of make it happen with Hawkinson here and some run backs on the other side. But for the most part, it's kind of hard to ignore Jalen Hurts here. At that quarterback position. So I think he's got a really big upside for.
Yeah, I love Hurts here. And what makes me even more keen on him is I think Gainwell is going to be incredibly chalky, and you don't see a whole lot of exposure to quarterbacks when a running back is chalky, like we talked about at the top. So I think that's going to draw some ownership away from the passing game for Philadelphia. I also think Gainwell is a really dicey play. I mean, that price tag is appealing, but we're going to see a good amount of Boston Scott. And ultimately, yes, Miles Sanders is out of the way, but this offense has not been utilizing the run game the way that they should. So those more touches coming for Gainwell, but not enough to where I'm going to feel super confident firing him up. And I think it's actually going to be a spot where we'll see a lot of people fall the wrong way down the board when they're eating that chalk on Gainwell.
Man, Boston Scott, man, like every year.
Yeah, I forget where I heard it, but someone reminded me a few days ago that Boston Scott's like, I think he's in his third or his fourth season. I thought this guy had been in the league for like 16 years. Maybe I just merged his career together with Darren Sproles in my mind, and they're just the same player.
That's amazing. Anything else you like from this game, or are we ready to move on?
We'll move on. Shout out Darren Sproles, wherever you at. Hope you living well, my guy. So we'll move on to the sales rack. It's maybe one of the best, at least certainly one of the most interesting parts of a trip to the pawn shop. Got to swing through and see what's on sale. These are not the high-ticket marquee items, but ultimately take a closer look, and you can usually walk away with something that you end up pretty happy with. And for us, the first of the showcase games features Tampa Bay heading to New Orleans. We're looking at a 4:25 kickoff. This one is sitting at a 48.5 over-under. This one is actually slid in the wrong direction. It opened over 50 at 50.5. Right now, Tampa Bay is a 4.5-point favorite there on the road in New Orleans. That leaves them with an implied total of 26.5, and New Orleans with an even 22. So busy week for the Saints. We obviously saw them in the showcase game, or in the Monday night game, I should say, where Alvin Kamara got, I believe it was 31 touches relative to the 33 touches for all of the Seattle skill players. So absolutely ran him into the ground. Alvin Kamara owners were jumping for joy that this volume they've all been waiting for is finally here. And the Saints flipped around and traded for Mark Ingram. And Sean Payton said that he's absolutely going to play immediately. So a little bit of a murky situation on the Saints side. For the Tampa Bay side, looks like we're going to be without Antonio Brown once more. And just in general, this Saints matchup has been one that has kind of stymied Tom Brady in their three matchups since he's become a Buccaneer. So Where are you looking at in this one in particular, Mike?
Yeah, I'm gonna have way too much of this game. Yeah, so here's the deal. I don't really like to play Jameis Winston, obviously, but look what we got here, the little revenge narrative, right? And then also Taysom Hill's out, so we don't have to worry about the the old Hill coming in and taking away the points here. So yeah, for me, I'm going to have a little bit of Jameis Winston, and that's the way to attack Tampa Bay. It's through the air. I'm not so interested in Kamara with so strong against the run. But on the other side, it's like Tom Brady, 7,400. I mean, he's always in play. Big ups to Mike Evans for helping me take down that GPP last week with his 3 touchdown catches. So, I think obviously him and Godwin still being, priced, I guess, accordingly right now. Does make me want Godwin a little bit more than Evans this week. I don't know. I have this thing, and maybe I shouldn't, that once a guy comes out, I don't know. I'll have probably more Godwin shares than I will Evans. I don't know how great of a feeling I'm going to have if Evans does go off again, but I just don't like to chase like those massive games. So I do have a ton of interest in this, stacking both sides. It's a little bit tougher on the New Orleans side to stack because the receivers, it's like, man, who do you really want to pair with Jameis Winston? But I think it's optimal because I think one plus yard, 3 touchdown games for Jameis. So I'm going to have a lot more than probably what I want to.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because all of the stacking options not named Alvin Kamara in New Orleans are crazy cheap, right? Callaway's like $5,400. Traquan Smith and Kenny Stills are sub 4K. Everyone saw Jameis going after Traquan on the sideline on the Monday night game, and his week 8 price just immediately plummeted. Not that he did much on the field anyways, but there aren't really a whole lot of guys there that are capable of catching the ball. So if you're going to have exposure to Winston, like you mentioned that you will, his stacking options and stacking partners leave you with a pretty appealing price tag in terms of, walking away with your primary build and what you spent on it. For me, the big storyline is on the Buccaneers side of the ball. Ultimately, I completely agree with your point that once a guy comes off a 3 touchdown game, to expect him to perform that way again is just a fool's errand. But also, Mike Evans has had trouble with Marshawn Lattimore in his career. He has not put up a good game against him in seemingly forever. And given the price discrepancy between the two, it's about a $600 price savings. I think we're going to see Chris Godwin as maybe one of the chalkiest receivers on the slate. In my mind, rightfully so. But I also never feel great about clicking the button on someone who I know is going to be super chalky. So is this a place where you just eat that chalk, Mike? Or do you maybe look to get super weird and try to find a tertiary player there in the Tampa Bay offense?
Yeah, it's a little tough, right? It's like you should just want to click Godwin, one, with the price savings, and 2, because Evans is coming off of the crazy game and the Lattimore matchup. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's just so many weapons, even with Brown being out with Tampa. I mean, let's not forget, obviously Fournette could gobble up some of these, really more than maybe 1 or 2 Fournettes, just in case. But that price tag 6,300 is a little tough. The other option obviously is potentially going to, if you played Mr. Johnson last week and it didn't quite work out for you, maybe now's the time to go back after him and see if you can't get a cheap one here. So I don't mind it. I may do that maybe on one lineup, but other than that, I'm kind of just going to play be owned at all and see where the night kind of takes me.
Yeah, I think the only other thing to maybe take a look at, and it'll be pending his availability, so something to watch in the late slate. But if Gronk is out there, I think that might be a really interesting way to get exposure to this game for minimal ownership, right? Generally speaking, players coming back from injury don't garner a whole lot of ownership. Players that are questionable on a late slate, not as many people late swap as you think. So it might be an interesting way to get tapped into this game at a $4,600 price tag. And it kind of ties back into that strategy I mentioned a moment ago, right? Most people are fading that sort of center cohort of tight ends in terms of the pricing. So you can get right in there at $4,600 and get a little different relative to the field.
And don't forget, maybe even just because I hyped up Jameis Winston, go ahead and just lock in the Bucs defense.
Do it.
And enjoy your 18 fantasy. Oh,
yeah.
Man. Good time.
Jameis Winston doesn't exactly have the best record in terms of situations where he's pressing and how that goes for him. So certainly has a pretty good turnover upside in terms of a fantasy defense to fire up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we will keep it moving, and we will stay in the NFC South. We are back in the 1 o'clock window for the Carolina Panthers heading to Atlanta to face off against the Dirty Birds. Looking at a 47-point over-under. This one has remained even since we've opened. The Falcons themselves are currently the standard 3-point home favorite. Gives them a 25-point implied total, with the Panthers looking at 22 even. So at least over the recent memory, your love for the Falcons has been pretty close to break even, paid off in a few areas. Obviously, we've seen Kyle Pitts start to emerge over these last few weeks. He is now the most expensive tight end on the slate. That does not include Kelsey or Waller. So definitely a few lines to at least kind of keep in mind or keep an open mind towards. Which one of those are you potentially looking at for this game, Mike?
Oh, man. I don't know if I've just spent too much money on the Falcons over the course of the last 3 or 4 weeks. And in regards to Calvin Ridley in particular, I mean, 6,600, like I just have to keep firing him up. Like I mean, he's an 8K player. So, I mean, he's just too good not to. So, I missed the Pitts train last week, but I had to use Oma train, ship it. So I guess I'm not too upset. But I did have Kyle Pitts on, probably 3 different weeks already, and now he's finally priced up. I'm probably not going to go there. I think Hubbard's interesting in this matchup. I'm not a huge fan of Hubbard, but I think just kind of with the struggles and everything with Darnold, I think that obviously I'm going to have some pieces of that. But really outside of that, I mean, you talked me into a little bit of Russell. I won Russell Gage lineup since we joked about it. And I'm like, so any of the guys that we joke, I put them on at least one lineup so that way it doesn't completely burn me. So that's my new strategy on the pawn shop. So I was able to get a little bit of Russell Gage love last week, which was nice. But, other than that, I think I'm just taking some pieces here or there from this game. I'm not going to go too crazy, too overboard on this thing. But, someone like a DJ Moore, they always hear some of these guys.
Yeah, I look at it in a similar light. There are a couple of shots that you should take in this game, and you should probably mix up who those pieces are, right? For me, I think those spots are specifically DJ Moore, again, in a cash context. His volume floor is just so steady there. On the other side of that offensive lineup, though, Robbie Anderson has been sneakily seeing increased target share each of the last 3 weeks. So could be a guy that very much so could take advantage of this favorable matchup against Atlanta, right? This is one of the ultimate get-right spots in the NFL. So a guy that is still largely sort of presumed dead across fantasy players' landscape, but is seeing double-digit targets in 2 of the last 3 weeks. Certainly has that slate-breaking upside if you can get him at 2-3% ownership, and he can get behind this Atlanta secondary. The other piece that I think is super interesting is Mike Davis. Again, Atlanta very favorable on the defensive side, and if you look at Cordell Patterson, he's starting to see increased work as a wide receiver in this Atlanta offense. So if you're able to get at least the lion's share of the running back touches in a single place and have that fall into Mike Davis's lap at $5,000, again, value is super thin on this slate, in my opinion. So to get, a 55, 60% opportunity share out of the backfield at 5K, probably have a couple of darts that I throw his way as well.
Yeah, I think I ran out of darts for our boy Mike Davis earlier in the year. But I could see why. I mean, 5K, it's like, yeah, you're searching for value here. If you can just have a decent game. I mean, he's shown some ability earlier in the year in the passing game. But just with Patterson being there and them liking to use him out of the backfield too and handing him the football as well, it's just a little bit tougher for me to kind of elsewhere.
Makes sense. Actually, catching up on the chat here, we've got Kyle popping in, showing the same confusion or at least blended point of view across Sproles and Boston Scott. And then Jeff also has something to say, a little confused as to why we're opening early here on the pawn shop. And he is right there with you. Mike Davis makes him want to vomit all over his shirt. So, Jeff, obviously, you've been tuning in for a few weeks here. Proud history of the players we make fun of ultimately going off. So at least get yourself one share, and you can thank me on Monday morning.
For sure.
So we'll move on to the third game here in the sales rack, and that is the Los Angeles Rams heading to Houston for a 1:00 game against the Texans. We're looking at an even 46-point total. This one opened with the Rams as a 14-point favorite on the road and has walked up to an even 15 points. That gives them a 30.5-point implied total. And the Texans once more sitting down in the basement with the lowest implied total on the slate at 15.5. So obviously projected to be a one-sided affair. We talked a lot about this in a similar light with the Rams facing off against Detroit last week. And now we see a Texans team that has shipped off their starting running back in Mark Ingram. That has apparently upset Brandon Cooks, who just realized that he was on the Texans. But with that, plenty of players that can certainly deliver, kind of top-tier performances in terms of this matchup. Where are you going with this one, Mike?
Oh, man. Cooper Kupp, 9K. Like, good Lord. I mean, I get it. Like, he's probably going to shred the Texans up. But, man, that's on a slate where there's not, like, just killer value as of yet. I mean, it's really tough to pay $9,000 for him. I don't know how much exposure I want to have to this game. I think this thing could just be pretty ugly, and I think Rams are just going to want to get into Houston, get up a few scores, and then grind the clock out. Just a little bit of interest in Daryl Henderson here, 6,500. Has shown some really good upside here. I think it's funny that the Texans at 4,900, Tyrod Taylor is their second most expensive player on the IR. It just jumps off the page. It just tells me how miserable this team has been, and I know you've had to live through it. So on that side, I don't have interest. Cooks is frustrated. There's just literally nothing on that side. I don't know if I've even rostered a Texan this entire year. I'm into something, man. Am I doing it wrong? Man.
I mean, as a public service announcement, it is always the right choice to avoid playing Texans wherever possible. So I don't think categorically you're doing something wrong. But in terms of this slate in particular, I do think there are a couple of pieces that are at least worth throwing a couple of darts on. I mentioned Mark Ingram heading out of town. For me, that opens up significant opportunity for David Johnson to reemerge as the primary ball carrier here in Houston. Obviously, he is not going to be David Johnson of old, but the thing that gives me reason for optimism around him is, one, his price tag. Again, very, very thin slate in terms of value overall. And to get David Johnson all the way down at $4,200, he's going to see, worst case scenario, 50% of the touches for this offense. But beyond that, over the last 3 weeks, his involvement in this offense has increased while Phillip Lindsay's has decreased. So I think them moving on from Mark Ingram is more so a vote of confidence in David Johnson. And Mark Ingram, for however much we want to laugh at the Texans, He was 10th in the league in red zone carries, and he saw 100% of their touches inside of the red zone. So if the Texans happen to get into scoring position, which is a legitimate if, David Johnson is very likely going to slot into those high-value touches. He's not going to be owned. He is easily the cheapest starting running back on the slate. I will have David Johnson, and I'll see you next week, and you can laugh and drink up all of my tears for making this terrible choice.
I'm gonna let you go off the deep end yourself, man. I'll jump in after you though at the end of the night tomorrow.
Next week, Mike will have a different host here in the pawn shop, as I will be off the deep end. So I'm going even further, way down. Give me some Nico Collins, $3,200. Again, back from IR, seeing increased workload and increased opportunity share in both of his weeks since he's come up. And this is a game where they're going to have to throw, and we'll likely see Ramsey staying busy with Cooks. So ultimately, it's only going to take one. The other matchups there in that Rams secondary are not nearly as strong as Ramsey, and just physically don't have the size to body up against a player of Nico Collins' physicality. So again, these are GPP darts. I will be overweight on the field, but to say that means I might have them in 3% of lineups. But ultimately, it's a place to save a little bit of money in a lineup where there's not a whole lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, on the Texans side, I if I'm going to do anything, it's going to be Phillip Lindsay. One, you could get that cheap touchdown, those cheap targets at the end of the game. And two, I know that we're looking at Johnson here as the bell cow, but I mean, you never really know how these things play out until they get onto the field. So I think he's a little interesting. I'm talking maybe one lineup. I'll have this, take a stab. Taking Henderson, playing a Woods every now and then, and really just trying to decide whether I'm full fading Cooper Kupp or if I'm going to put him in a few lineups. So that's just kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, for me, that's probably the more logical line to take on this game. So we won't expose the people to anything more in terms of my Texans rambling, and we'll carry on to the last game here in the sales rack, and that is Jacksonville heading up to the Pacific Northwest to face off against the Seahawks. It's a 405 game with a 45-point total. This one has come up by 2 points. It opened at 43. And the Seahawks are 3.5-point favorites at home under the watchful eye of Mr. Geno Smith. So, Mike, last week we saw Geno Smith complete 2 balls to DK Metcalf. Just one of them happened to be an 84-yard bomb. And after that, largely and somewhat perplexingly, just continued to feed the ball to Alex Collins on the Jacksonville side. Certainly hasn't been a slate breaker, but we do have back-to-back top 12 performances under Trevor Lawrence's belt on his rookie campaign. So anything interesting here in terms of leverage or darts that you want to throw?
Yeah, I mean, this game's interesting. You take a look at it here, and the quarterbacks are a little interesting in large field GPP. I do like Trevor Lawrence. 5,500 as he continues to progress. I don't mind. Lockett's always someone that's kind of interesting, especially with Russell being out. I think obviously he's going to probably be unowned here, so I don't mind taking a stab here or there on that. I think overall, what I'm looking at though is James Robinson, and I'm just trying to see how many lineups I can get him in at that price tag at 6,600. It's a great matchup. I think he's obviously going to be popular, but this is one of the guys off of Eckler I can save some money on and spend elsewhere since there's not.
Yeah, ultimately, I'm right there with you with Robinson. He is going to be a chalky play, but over the last few weeks, he's settled back into that workload that made him viable across the 2020 campaign. So definitely will have my fair share of that play. And that's largely where I'm going to get my exposure to this game. I think Lockett will be a little bit interesting because most of the ownership will break over to the DK Metcalf side coming off of that long touchdown. But I think I'm probably going to be pretty underweight on this matchup on the whole.
Yeah, I think this is one that I'm going to have some exposure to in winner take all, unfortunately. So we'll see how that works out.
Hey, let's see if we can make it 2 weeks in a row, shipping one of those 4K paydays. And so that is our last stop here at the sale rack. So that means we are going dumpster diving down in the bargain bin. Always, maybe not the best, but certainly one of the most interesting parts of any trip to the pawn shop. We got to see exactly what's down in the bin. If you end up spending money here, you're probably not going to be super thrilled with what you get back. But if you go there enough, you're eventually going to pluck a diamond from that rough. And the first game that we have in the bargain bin is the San Francisco 49ers heading to Chicago to face the Matt Nagy-less Bears. This is a 39.5-point total in the 1 o'clock block. The 49ers, are 3.5-point favorites. That gives them an implied total of 21.5, with the Bears down at 18 points. Mike, anything that you're looking at for this game?
Oof, boy, no. Deebo Samuel, man, he's 7,400. Like, that is just so pricey for me. Obviously he's been producing. So, I don't mind it. This is because I just don't see this one doing much here. It's just two quarterbacks that just aren't very dynamic as of yet. I mean, who knows? Maybe Matt Nagy not being there may open up Justin Fields here. So I guess that's potentially something to look out for.
Yeah, I am hopeful that his absence will help everybody in the Chicago offense, but ultimately I'm not quite ready to stake my hard-earned dollars on that. I'll go blow my money on the Texans instead. Eli Mitchell, I think, is a little bit interesting, just given how much he's cemented his role there. He is very much so a ham and egger. He's not going to be involved in the passing game, so it's basically touchdown or bust. But against this Bears defense, touchdown is certainly on the range of outcomes. So might have a couple of shots there on him, but ultimately not trying to get too involved in what is listed as the lowest point total on the slate. So we will move on to our next bargain bin game, and that is the Denver Broncos hosting the Washington football team. This one is a 45-point total. It has gone up by a point since it opened. Denver is currently a standard 3-point home favorite as they host the football team. Gives them an implied total of 24 and football team with 21. Mike, any players in here that are in the mix for you in week 8?
But really outside of that, I mean, it's just, I guess you could look at Jerry Jeudy as someone to, if you're looking to save a little bit of salary. I think he's a little interesting. Noah Fant at that tight end position, he's just at that price point where I'm like, man, do I want to pay right there in that 4.5 to 5.5 area, or do I just want to completely punt it? So for the most part, I think I'm looking to attack Sutton. McLaurin's price tag, 7,600 allow you to kind of really get that high. At least for me, I don't know if I can kind of stomach that. So, outside of that, there's not much here other than, probably a Sutton play here or there. And, just kind of moving on from this one.
Yeah, Sutton is the only name that I have circled on the board. And it's one part because I think he stands to deliver decent value relative to his price tag. The other part is relative to Judy's price tag. I think Sutton's going to be way under-owned. So to be able to get leverage on the field like that is something that I'm always looking out for. But ultimately, not really going out of my way to fire up much from this game. So we will take our third stop here in the bargain bin, and that is featuring the Cincinnati Bengals heading to New York to face off against the Jets. We are looking at a 43-point total, again, down a point from 44. The Bengals are huge favorites on the road, 11.5-point favorites. That gives them an implied total of 26.75, with the Jets Jets all the way down at 16 1/4. Mike, what are you doing with this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just fire up the Bengals defense at 3,600 this week. So that's going to be one of my core defenses this week. Chase 7,500. He's, shredding everybody. I think obviously the Jets are someone you can attack. But I'm really looking at a player, I feel like. So at some point, I feel like he's just going to break out. We've seen Chase just have these monster games. Joe Mixon, 6,900 against this run defense. Yeah, I mean, I would assume he's going to be one of the more popular running backs on the slate. It's a little tough, though, with, Pirine kind of being in the way there. You just kind of never know what you're going to get there. I wish, if Pirine was out, I would just fire up Mixon on every single lineup. So, just kind of mix and match it in on the Jets side. What about you?
Yeah, it's Higgins for me. Coming off of a 15 target game and just given the type of player that he's shown to be, he is very much so due for some positive regression. My concern is that with the price tag that he's carrying, he's also going to be super chalky. And this is a game where Cincinnati is likely to be up and up early. So might walk back some of the passing opportunity for this Bengals offense. So, it's certainly an opportunistic play in terms of points per dollar. But I do think it's going to be one of the chalkier spots on the board, too.
Yeah. Shall we dance and move on?
Yeah, we will close out the bargain bin with our last game. That is the Pittsburgh Steelers heading to Cleveland to face off against the Browns. We are looking at a 42.5-point total. This one is currently sitting with the Browns as a 3.5-point home favorite. That leaves them with an implied total of 23 points. And the Steelers all the way down at 19.5. So, Mike, any players in particular that you're looking to pluck out of this game?
Yeah, I'm going to have way too much Deontay Johnson. I mean, he's just a target monster in this offense. So, I like the matchup. I know Noodle Arm really looks to him to make plays. So, yeah, it's someone I'm going to fire up probably more than I should. Nick Chubb's a little interesting, 6,800, especially with Hunt being out. Obviously, you have the kid right behind me. But, I think Chubb, obviously, anytime he's under 7K, he's always someone you can look at. Najee Harris, just with, the targets and everything potentially being there with Noodle Arm checking down. 7,500, I don't think a lot of people want to click that, so it does make me like him a little bit. And there's just not much on the Cleveland side that I'm really too excited with.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think Chubb is really the most interesting play out of this game, given his price tag, given that Kareem Hunt is out. I do think Dearness Johnson does get a bit of run this week, but doesn't quite get that full Kareem Hunt role. So a lot to like about Nick Chubb in this matchup. And Najee Harris is really more of a cash game play for me. If we get closer to lock and his ownership is remaining pretty low, maybe I'll find a spot or two to roster him. But really think he fits more into that cash build than he does into the GPP build.
Yep.
Right on. Well, with that, we have now gone end to end on the Week 8 slate. I want to thank everyone for spending a little bit of time with us. I know that we opened early here at the Pawn Shop. But as we wrap up, Mike, you want to tell everyone where they can find you?
Usually most Saturdays you can find me hiding from the latest Texas game. But on Twitter, you can find me at MCHolland34. If you are in the DraftKings lobby and happen to see the DFS Avenger or MC Holland 34, that is me.
There he is, the DFS Avenger here on these streets. Cash in these winner take alls. We're going to see if we can make it back-to-back weeks. And with that, we are going to close the doors here on the Pawn Shop, and we will see you with some green screens next week.